Her name was Claire, and for 6 years I believed our marriage was the one thing in my life that didn't need fixing. I'm an architect. I build things that are supposed to last, and I thought I'd built a marriage the same way: solid foundation, clean lines, nothing hidden in the walls. We lived in a converted brownstone in Denver that I'd renovated with my own hands, and every night for 6 years I came home to the same woman, the same routine, the same quiet certainty that nothing was wrong. The first crack showed up on a Tuesday in March, small enough that I almost stepped over it. I was going through our shared email for a hotel confirmation. We had a trip to Sedona booked for her birthday, and I found a receipt from a boutique hotel downtown, dated 2 weeks earlier, for a single night. I hadn't stayed there. I asked her about it that evening, casually, the way you ask about a missing sock rather than a missing piece of your life. She barely looked up from her laptop. A work colleague's going away party ran late, she said, and rather than drive home after wine, she'd booked a room to be safe. It was smart, responsible, even. I told myself that was exactly the kind of thing Claire would do: cautious, practical, always thinking 2 steps ahead. I let it go. I didn't notice that the hotel was 11 minutes from our house and 40 from her office. That was the fact I buried, the one I'd unearth much later and recognize for what it actually was. But at the time, I filed it under normal marriage noise and moved on, because that's what you do when you've decided a person is safe. You build excuses for them faster than they can build lies. Looking back now, I can see the months that followed, the way you see a photograph developing in a darkroom, the image bleeding into view a little more with each pass through the chemicals. Claire started going to a new gym in April, one clear across town instead of the one 3 blocks from her office. She said the class schedule was better. She started running earlier, leaving before 6, back before I woke, and when I offered to join her, she always had a reason it wouldn't work. Different pace, different playlist, needing the alone time to think. Her phone, which used to sit face up on the kitchen counter while she cooked, started living in her back pocket, then in her bag, then finally in a drawer in her home office that she began locking, something she said was for her work laptop and confidential client files. She bought new underwear that spring, delicate things in colors she never used to wear, and when I mentioned it, almost as a compliment, she said a friend had dragged her to a boutique and she'd gotten swept up in it. She lost 11 pounds over 4 months without any diet talk, without any of the complaining that used to come with her trying to lose 5. She started taking calls in the garage with the door down, saying the connection was better out there, which never made sense in a house with 3 bars of signal in every room. Her college roommate Denise started calling more, or so Claire said, though I never once heard Denise's actual voice on speaker or saw a single text thread between them. I noticed all of it and forgave all of it, one piece at a time, because each piece on its own looked survivable. It was only when I lined them up in a row months later that I understood I'd been watching a woman quietly constructing an entire second life, brick by brick, while I complimented her new gym schedule. The proof came from a place I never expected. My own business partner, a man named Grant who did closings for a title company 2 floors below our architecture firm. He mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd seen Claire having dinner at a restaurant near the airport with a man he didn't recognize. Someone who wasn't me. Someone who'd had his hand over hers on the table the entire meal. Grant hadn't meant anything by it. He assumed it was a client dinner, a work thing, and only brought it up because he'd been surprised Claire's firm did business that far out of downtown. I said nothing, but that night I hired a private investigator named Frank Doyle, a retired sheriff's deputy who worked cases like mine out of a strip mall office with a coffee machine older than his cases. Took Frank 9 days to hand me a manila folder that changed the entire shape of my life. Inside were photographs of Claire with a man named Derek Cole, a commercial real estate broker 14 years older than her, divorced, with a downtown loft and a black SUV registered in his name. There were photos of them leaving a boutique hotel together on a Tuesday afternoon, the same chain, though not the same location, as the one from that receipt back in March. There were photos of them at a rooftop bar, her head tipped back laughing at something he'd said. His arm draped along the back of her chair like he'd done it 100 times before. There was a photo of them walking into his building at 11 at night and not coming back out until morning. Frank had pulled bank records too, showing recurring charges to a florist near Derek's office, flowers Claire had never once brought home, and a monthly charge to a storage unit facility across town that I had no idea existed, one we'd never discussed, one that wasn't on any budget spreadsheet we shared. I sat with that folder open on my kitchen table for almost 2 hours before I moved a single muscle. I want to say I felt rage, but what I actually felt was colder than that. A kind of clean, mechanical clarity, the same feeling I get when I find a structural flaw in a building I designed and I know exactly what has to be torn out before anything can be rebuilt. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't confront her the next morning either. I'd learned enough from watching other men make that mistake to know that confrontation too early only gives the other person time to build a better lie. So I waited, and I watched, and I let Claire believe her second life was still invisible. Then, on a Friday in late June, Claire left for what she said was a 3-day marketing conference in Scottsdale. She kissed me on the cheek at the door, told me not to wait up for her call because the hotel Wi-Fi was unreliable, and said she'd be back Monday evening. Monday came and went with no word. Tuesday, nothing. By Wednesday, I'd called her office, and her assistant told me, with the kind of hesitation that confirms exactly what you already suspect, that there had never been a conference in Scottsdale on the company calendar. Claire had taken personal leave. Her phone went straight to voicemail every time I tried, and when I checked our shared bank account, I found a withdrawal of $6,000 taken out in cash the morning she left. Money pulled from a savings account we'd built together over 4 years for a kitchen renovation that would now never happen. 7 days passed with no word from my wife. Not a text, not a call, not so much as a location ping on the family sharing app she'd apparently forgotten was still active on an old device, which was how I confirmed on day 5 that she was staying in Derek Cole's building downtown, the same building Frank had photographed weeks earlier. I didn't drive over there. I didn't call Derek. I didn't call her mother or her sister or anyone who might have panicked and warned her that I knew. Instead, I did something I'd been quietly planning since the night I first opened that folder. Something that had been growing in me with the patience of a man pouring a foundation he intends to build an entire new structure on. I called a moving company on day 3, the kind that does full house relocations, and I told them I needed everything out within 4 days. Every piece of furniture Claire had chosen, every item that carried her fingerprints on our life together. Not thrown away, not destroyed, just removed, cataloged, and placed into the same storage unit facility across town where she'd apparently been hiding her own secrets for months, except this time under my name and my lock. I kept only what belonged to me before I ever met her and what I'd need to function. My drafting table, 1 bed, a couch, the kitchen basics. Everything else, every throw pillow and framed photo and piece of her mother's china she'd insisted we display, went into a truck and out of the house that had been mine before it was ever ours. I repainted the bedroom over that weekend, a color she hated, one I'd always wanted and she'd always vetoed. I had the locks changed on day 6, a company that specialized in same-day rekeying, and I gave the new keys only to myself. I didn't do it out of spite exactly, though I won't pretend spite had no part in it. I did it because I needed her to walk back into that house, if she ever did walk back in, and understand immediately and without a single word from me that the life she thought she could return to whenever her second one grew inconvenient no longer existed. I wanted the emptiness of those rooms to say everything I wasn't going to bother saying myself. On the 7th night, close to 9 in the evening, I heard her key fail to turn in the new lock, then heard her knock, tentative at first, then harder. I opened the door and stepped back to let her in, and I watched her face as she crossed the threshold into a house that had been stripped down to its bones. The living room held nothing but my drafting table and a single lamp. The dining room, where we used to eat dinner every night for 6 years, was bare hardwood and nothing else. She walked from room to room with her heels clicking on empty floors, past the bedroom now painted a color she'd once called depressing, into the kitchen where the china cabinet her mother had given us for our wedding no longer stood. She turned to me in the hallway, and for the first time since I'd known her, I watched real fear move across her face. Not performed, not strategic, just raw. She asked what had happened to everything, and I told her plainly that everything was in storage, cataloged and safe, waiting for a conversation about who actually owned what once the divorce was finalized. She started to explain about Scottsdale, about the conference, about needing space, and I let her get about 4 sentences in before I set Frank's folder down on the one piece of furniture left in the dining room, my drafting table, and told her I already knew everything, that I'd known for weeks, and that the only reason I hadn't said anything sooner was that I wanted to see how far she'd let the lie run before it finally caught up with her. She didn't cry right away. She stood very still, looking at the photographs one at a time, the rooftop bar, the hotel, Derek's building, and I watched something in her posture give way, the confidence draining out of her the same way the furniture had drained out of our house. She said it wasn't what it looked like, and I told her that at this point, with 6 weeks of documented evidence and a $6,000 cash withdrawal and a storage unit she'd never mentioned, it was exactly what it looked like, nothing less. She asked where she was supposed to sleep that night in a house with no bed but mine, and I told her that wasn't my problem to solve anymore, that Derek's loft had a guest room the last time Frank photographed the building, and she was welcome to it. She left an hour later without taking anything, because there was nothing left in that house that belonged to her to take. I found out afterward, through Frank, that she'd gone straight to Derek's building, and that within 3 weeks he'd stopped answering her calls entirely, having apparently decided that a woman still legally married and now openly hunting for a permanent landing spot wasn't the arrangement he'd signed up for. Whatever comfort she'd built with him evaporated roughly as fast as our furniture had. I filed for divorce the following week, using Frank's documentation and the bank records as the backbone of the case. I hired a lawyer named Diane Marsh, sharp and unsentimental, who told me from our first meeting that infidelity alone wouldn't move a Colorado court much, but that a $6,000 unauthorized withdrawal from marital savings, combined with an undisclosed storage unit and a pattern of deception stretching back months, would matter a great deal when it came to how assets got divided and how much credibility Claire had left in front of a judge. Claire's side came out swinging in the first hearing. Her attorney argued that she'd been emotionally neglected, that a woman needs to feel seen, that the withdrawal was simply access to funds she was entitled to as a spouse. Diane didn't raise her voice. She laid the photographs on the table one at a time, the timeline of the storage unit rentals going back 4 months before Claire ever disappeared, the hotel receipts stretching back to that first one in March that Claire had explained away as a colleague's party. The judge, a woman close to retirement age who looked like she'd heard every excuse a marriage could produce, asked Claire directly whether the storage unit had been disclosed to me before I discovered it through investigation. Claire's hesitation before she answered told the room everything the photographs hadn't already made clear. The house stayed with me, since I'd owned the land and the original structure years before Claire and I ever married, and the renovations were documented as premarital investment under Colorado law. The furniture that had briefly gone into storage came back into my possession as marital property acquired predominantly with my income, something Diane established through 6 years of bank statements showing Claire's contributions had been modest against my own. Claire kept her car, her personal accounts, and very little else. Spousal support was set at a limited, temporary rate given the short marriage length relative to a longer one, and the judge noted for the record that Claire's own financial conduct during the separation period had not helped her position. Her mother called me twice in the weeks after the ruling, first to accuse me of destroying her daughter's life with what she called an act of cruelty, emptying a house while a woman was traveling, and second, a month later, in a much quieter voice, to ask whether I thought Claire would be all right, since she'd moved back into her childhood bedroom with nowhere else to go. I told her honestly that I didn't know, and that it wasn't a question I was equipped to answer anymore, since I'd spent 6 years assuming I knew my wife completely and had been wrong about nearly everything that mattered. I moved the furniture back into the house slowly over the following months, not all at once, and not always the same pieces. Some things I sold outright, the dining table where she used to sit across from me every night while quietly building a second life I couldn't see. Some things I kept and simply moved into different rooms so that even the parts of our old life that remained no longer sat where they used to sit. I repainted 2 more rooms that summer, not because the colors mattered particularly, but because I wanted the whole house to feel like mine again, uncomplicated by 6 years of assumptions I never should have made. Frank checked in with me once toward the end of the year, the way people do when a case closes but the relationship doesn't quite end with the paperwork. He asked if the house finally felt like home again. I told him it did, more than it had in months, maybe more than it had in years, because for the first time since March I wasn't quietly explaining away things that didn't add up. Diane sent the final decree not long after. Everything settled. Everything documented. Nothing left open for either side to reopen later. Claire tried to reach out once more in the fall. A text asking if we could talk. No explanation of what there was left to discuss. I didn't answer it. Not out of anger anymore. That had burned off somewhere in the months of hearings and photographs and empty rooms. But because I'd already had the only conversation that mattered, the one that happened in a stripped-bare house on a summer night when she walked through empty rooms and understood, without me needing to explain a single detail, exactly what 7 days of silence had cost her. I started seeing someone new that winter, slowly, without any urgency to fill space that didn't need filling. She asked me once, early on, why my house felt so deliberately put together. Every room considered, nothing left to chance. I told her the short version, that I'd rebuilt it once already, from nearly nothing, and that I'd learned the hard way that a house, like a marriage, only stays standing if you actually know what's holding it up. She didn't push for more than that, and I didn't offer it because some renovations you do quietly, and you let the finished result speak for the work instead of narrating every board you tore out to get there. What stays with me now, almost a year later, isn't the photographs or the hearings or even the $6,000 that never came back. It's the 7 days of silence that preceded all of it, the way a person can vanish from your life for a week and still be less absent than they'd already been for months without your noticing. Claire didn't just disappear that June. She'd been disappearing gradually since March, one hotel receipt and one locked drawer and one unexplained storage unit at a time, and by the time she physically walked out the door, there was almost nothing left of the woman I married for me to actually lose. The empty house she walked back into a week later wasn't cruelty on my part. Not really. It was just the truth finally made visible. Every empty room a plain statement of what had already been true for months before either of us said it out loud. The house is full again now, differently arranged, differently held together, and for the first time in longer than I want to admit, nothing in it is hiding anything from me at all.